Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, and today a story of two IEMs. Not because I've got two different brands or models of IEM here, but because the tin Hifi P2 planar magnetic in-ear monitors are one of the most polarized sounding IEMs depending on how you set them up. Before I get into the details of this review, I want to say a huge thanks to Linsol as the retailer who made this review possible. They've sent me the P2, there's no affiliate connections or anything like that with Linsol, it's just an opportunity for me to review a very popular IEM that a lot of people have been asking about. That's built on the back of the fact that the tin Hifi P1 had a bit of a cult following despite, from all reports, being a slightly flawed IEM in some ways. So I was really keen to find out if the P2s were able to fix some of those flaws and impress me. I've never heard the original P1s, but I was still keen to see if the P2s could impress me on their own merits. The P2s retail for $369 US, or roughly 500 Australian dollars, and so they're in that kind of mid-fi tier. They're a little bit more than your average budget IEM, but they're certainly not at the flagship level in the $1,000 range and above. So with that in mind, let's start talking about what you get for your $370 US.
You and I, we are so random. You bring the darkness to the light, split the atom. I ignore the fact that this will never last. Your words come out so soothing that I forget that this thing is confusing. Having such a blast, but don't ask where my head is at, 'cause I'm cruising through the rush of us. I don't care about love, just need your touch. Want you to be my vice, 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 vice.
First up, these are a 12mm planar magnetic driver. So yeah, that's right, they're a planar magnetic in much the same way as the Mesa Empyreans, the Audeze LCD2s, all of the Hifi planar range. They're the same exact idea. We have got a film with a voice coil within that film and an array of magnets behind and or in front that then cause the film to move as current passes through the wire, the trace, within the film itself. It's traditionally been a design reserved for full-sized headphones, or in the case of Audeze's in-ears, quite a large, open, out-of-the-ear type design with a nozzle that goes in the ear. So to have a full planar magnetic design in such a tiny space begs a lot of curiosity as to how well it can perform. On top of that, these are not particularly sensitive earphones, so they're a 32 ohm design and only 90 decibel sensitivity. So that means they actually need quite a lot of power. Something that's really interesting about the P2s though is that whilst they demand quite a bit of power to get decent sound and decent volume, they're also quite limited because they have a maximum power input of just 10 milliwatts. So that's a pretty low level and will only produce a maximum of 100 decibels. So for those of you that like really loud listening, or you like to play with EQs and really pump up different frequencies and therefore may require an output greater than 10 milliwatts to get the sort of peak output you're looking for, the P2s are kind of an interesting one. I haven't tested and I don't intend to test what the limitations of that power are, but what I can say is they certainly got loud enough for me in testing, but do recognize that they are limited by that maximum power input. I'm guessing that's to do with the amount of excursion that the planar magnetic film is able to comfortably do, but I don't know in detail. The good news is that means that the P2s can technically be driven by most devices. It's very rare to find a device that can't put 10 milliwatts into 32 ohms. However, whether the quality is going to be up to the standard, that's another question as always. So with power and price and specs out of the way, let's start talking about what you get, other than the earphones themselves of course, for the $370 US. Inside the packaging here, we've got a really nice layout of accessories. Now this packaging is notoriously hard to get off. Here we go. And once you're inside, it's a two-part box. On the top layer, and I've tucked away the pull tab to make it easy to put away, but here we go. In the top layer, in those holes there, you've got a pouch, which you can see in front of me here, and also the IEMs themselves. Where the magic happens though, is in the drawer below. Now I've currently got this drawer in a bit of a disheveled state because I've been testing it and playing around, but it's a really fully featured IEM setup, and I applaud Tin Hifi for all they provide. You've got 6 different silicone tips, you've got 6 different foam tips, the cable itself, which I'll talk about in a second. You've then got, because the cable is terminated in a 2.5mm balanced connection, you've then got a 2.5 to 4.4mm balanced connector or adapter, and you've got a 2.5 to 3.5 single-ended adapter. So that means you can literally use the P2 with any device, with any output. The only thing it doesn't provide you with is a 6.3mm adapter, but most people should be in a position where they can adapt from the 2.5 into the 3.5 and then have your own 6.3 adapter to go from the 3.5 to the 6.5. So everything's been thought of. The quality of all of the pieces feels good. They're not exceptional, but the adapters feel fine. The tip range is good, and the cable is really, really good. Let's take a look at that. So inside this leather pouch here, which by the way is a beautiful blue leather pouch, it's genuine leather, nice big studs on the side with no sharp edges that are going to get caught on anything, and it looks to me like a case that's going to wear really nicely over time and end up with a beautiful patina to it, and also stand up to day-to-day use, being thrown in a work bag, a backpack, etc. Once you get past all of those accessories though, here are the bits that really matter. This cable is just beautiful to work with. It's soft, it's relatively supple, it doesn't want to coil itself up and get tangled, it just sits really nicely. I haven't counted the cores, but it's, I think, an 8-core cable. Whatever it is, it's got plenty of cores to allow you to have, as I mentioned before, a properly balanced connection. On the end of it, we've got a 2-pin connector, but it is a recessed 2-pin, and that to me is probably the one drawback, is it may limit which cables you can use. The cable of course then connects to your IEMs, and you can see here they're relatively small. You'll also have seen this in the opening video introducing the product. They're relatively small. They've got an interesting panel on the back, which if you look closely, and I don't know if I'll be able to show this in the video when I put it together, but it looks to me like there is some venting going on under the textured little piece, the triangular sort of shaped piece here. So I don't know if there's some venting going on to allow for the excursion of the driver and make a more open sound. The isolation is quite good with these, so whatever venting is being done is fairly minimal, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something under there that's allowing a bit of airflow, because if you look at it in just the right light, which I'm even having trouble doing now, there is certainly a difference in the color or the lightness of this patch depending on which part you look at and the light that it's in. So there might be some venting. What it means for us ultimately is nothing, because isolation's good. It's obviously doing whatever it needs to do if it's there without giving up too much isolation. Now the one final thing you might notice as you're looking at me hold on to these is that I've got foam tips on them. If you've watched the channel before, you'll know I'm not a huge fan of foam tips in most situations, and yet with the P2s, the foam tips are my choice. And that's why I started out this review saying that this was a review of 2 IEMs, because I've never come across an IEM before that is so completely different depending on the tips you've used. I'm a big proponent of people tuning their IEMs with tips, but it's subtle adjustments normally. It's a little tweak in the bass, a little tweak in the treble, a little adjustment to soundstage. With the P2s, it's like 2 different earphones almost. So let me explain that a bit more. When using the stock tips, and indeed whether I use the stock tips or the spiral dots or the spin fits, so all silicone tips, the treble from the P2s to me is just a little bit tinny and a little bit too it's not in your face, but it feels a bit raised, and it makes for an artificial overall tonal quality to the P2 sound. Changing to the foam tips completely transforms these into a really magnificent IEM. So let me talk about the 2 different sound signatures, starting with silicone and ending with foam. So with silicone tips on there, as I've mentioned, the treble gets a bit too bright and a bit too tinny for my taste, but the sound is very agile, it comes across very fast, there's still a good sense of bass presence and richness, but it doesn't come across boosted at all, it's just got good presence and weight. With the silicone tips still, the mid-range is slightly boosted at the upper end, but it does have good presence overall, so it's not getting too thin or too dry, but it is starting to get a bit of extra presence at the upper end of the register. The signature with the silicone tips is overall pleasant, but it's a little bit too enhanced at the top end, as I've already alluded to. To put that into perspective, one of the tracks I was listening to as I reviewed these was Living Forever by Genesis. And on that track with the P2s, Phil Collins' voice, which is already quite a high register male voice, got really nasal and dry, and it was all because of that upper treble lift coming through from the P2s. The other thing I noticed in that track is that there is a snare being played with brushes, and the brushed snare just took over the whole track. It was almost like it was the only thing I could focus on because it was so enhanced by the P2s with the silicone tips. The other thing I found as I listened to Living Forever, but also all tracks when using the silicone tips, was that the soundstage was okay, but it wasn't great, and the layering was kind of good, but it was also a bit too congested. I just felt like everything needed a bit more space to open up. And in this case, I believe that problem is caused by that treble boost, creating a bit of masking and getting in the way of hearing all of the sounds and all of the depth and the layers in the music. It's not very often that I turn to foam tips. Most of the time when I do reviews, I don't even actually try the foam tips because they're really preferable in my experience. That's all just personal taste. I know some of you out there will be big fans of foam tips, and that's totally fine. But for me, I very, very rarely reach for foam because silicone's more convenient and generally for me sounds better. But in the case of the P2s, I almost wonder if they were tuned with foam tips because they transform into a magnificent IEM once you put that foam tip on. And you're left with a beautifully, probably slightly warmer, but very, very slightly warmer than neutral earphone. When I was testing the foam tips, one of the tracks that I played was Shadows by Rufus Wainwright. On this track, there's a fairly prominent hi-hat being played throughout. And what I noticed with the foams was that hi-hat was much more natural sounding and it was much more balanced with the rest of the frequencies. It allowed the vocals to come forwards and be in good balance with the mix because they weren't too dry or too nasal, and they also weren't being overshadowed by things like the hi-hat. By pulling back on the treble, there's a lot more detail to be had through your mid-range, in your vocals, your instruments. The layering gets better as a result, and the overall sense of soundstage space also improved. For me, as I've already said a couple of times, it's literally like listening to two completely different earphones. So if you're somebody that's already got the P2s and maybe you're not completely sold on them, do try them with the foams before you give up. And if you're somebody thinking about buying the P2s, make sure that you try the foam tips before you come to your final conclusion on whether or not to keep them. They're, in my opinion, a very special IEM once you get the right tips. As always, I did a range of different testing and comparisons with the P2s up against a few other earphones that I particularly like, or that I think are a good match against the P2s. One of the first tests was with the Audiofly AF1120 Mk2. These retail for a little bit more than the P2s and are a really nice, neutral, potentially slightly warm sounding earphone. With the silicone tips on the P2s, it was really no contest. The sound from the P2 was just too bright, it got that congestion coming from it, and things were just off balance in general. But when I switched to foam, things were much closer, and whilst the 1120 still held the edge in terms of soundstage size and layering of sounds, the P2 was very, very close. Given that it's also a much cheaper IEM, and it does produce a better bass response thanks to the planar driver, it's a really compelling offering at the price. One of the tracks I was listening to for this test was Hannah by Robert Downey Jr. And yes, it's that Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man, etc. He's produced one album called The Futurist, which is one of my favorite albums. It's a great recording, it's got some really interesting music on it, and it's fascinating to hear Robert Downey Jr. as a musician and not just an actor. But anyway, that's a side note. What I heard when I was listening to the two was that the P2 had a more centered image, a more focused and intimate sound, whereas the 1120s gave you a little tiny bit more space between you and the vocalist and also produced a slightly larger, deeper soundstage. I wouldn't say one was better or worse, it's just different presentations of the sound that some people will have a preference for one way or the other. I personally enjoyed both thoroughly. One other thing that was interesting when I was doing this test was, despite having the foam tips and pulling back the treble, I did still find the P2 to be slightly brighter than the AF1120s. The AF1120s are quite a mid-range focused earphone because they are quite a flat overall response, whereas the P2s bring that treble energy forward and allow you to get a little bit more sparkle and a little bit more detail, but with the foam tips, it's much better balanced compared to the silicone. The other comparison I tried was with another sort of secret favorite of mine, which is the Shozy Form 1.4. These are an interesting earphone, they're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but with the spiral dot tips on them, I really like them. They present a beautiful soundstage, beautiful image, they're very comfortable and good to look at. So whilst costing a little bit less than the P2s, I think they're a nice comparison once you put the foam tips on the P2s and you're getting that slightly warmer and better spatially presented sound out of the P2 drivers. Putting the two up against one another, what I found was that the boosting in the treble is slightly different between the two models. The Form 1.4 boosts the treble a little bit lower in the frequency range, whereas the P2 boosts it a little bit higher. And that does result in a slightly different presentation of space and soundstage size from each of the earphones. What I found was that the P2 images a little better, so the actual focus of the image is probably a little bit stronger, but the sense of space in the soundstage is better on the Form 1.4. So you're doing a slight trade-off for space with the Form 1.4, focus for the P2, but really both of them are outstanding. Out of the two, on pure sound quality, I would probably lean towards the P2 slightly, but from a comfort point of view, I think the Form 1.4 still win. I didn't mention at the beginning, and I probably should have, I find the P2s slightly awkward in the fit. They're not bad, they're not like the Blonde BLO3, but they are ever so slightly funky to get fitted. I think it must be something to do with the angle of the nozzle, but I did find, particularly with the silicone tips, I was adjusting them a lot. At times with the silicone tip, it would actually close off. Either the tip of the silicone was getting bent or it was pressing up against part of the curve of the ear canal and partially occluding the sound or closing off the sound and reducing the volume of one earphone or the other. So I had to do a lot of fiddling to get the correct channel balance without accidentally blocking off one of the outputs. So with that in mind, the P2s are a little bit finicky to get fitted, at least for my ears. Now my ears do have quite a sharp bend fairly close to the opening of the ear, so this is not going to be a problem for all people, but it's worth knowing about if you're like me and you occasionally have issues with fit. The foam tips definitely help because you can rely on the grip of the foam in the ear canal more so than the deep insertion of the silicone tip. All in all though, I think the P2s offer a really outstanding value. They're a unique driver in the sense that they are planar magnetic. They do require a good amount of power to drive, but you should get really comfortable levels out of almost any digital audio player, external DAC from a smartphone. So whether it's I've tried it with things like the FiO BTR5, which I've got coming up for review, Dragonfly Red, the EMN DACs, obviously from things like Mojo or full desktop systems, you've got no problems at all. But you do need to know that you're going to need to feed them a decent amount of power, and you're also going to need a good quality sound or good quality power in order to get the most out of them. They're resolving and they're detailed, but they definitely thrive on good quality power. So this is not about having maximum power, it's about having quality of power. And that means a quality device. So not a smartphone that happens to have enough volume, but more so moving into things like a Dragonfly Red, Dragonfly Cobalt, EMN Sparrow, Chord Mojo, a good DAP, so whether it's a Hifi DAP or an Astel and Kern DAP, any of those sorts of devices are going to get the most out of the P2. The other thing that I want to reiterate is that the accessory package is absolutely first class, and things like the cable quality, the accessories available with those different adapters, all of it makes for an outstanding piece of value in the audio game at around that $370 price tag. So if that's of interest to you, I'll put a link to Linsol down below where you can say thank you by buying through their store. Once again, there's no affiliate connection there. It's just a way of saying thanks to retailers who make these reviews possible. I should also let you know at the moment that if you are a fan of IEMs like the P2 and many others in that price range, I've got a bunch more reviews coming. I've got about 3 or 4 different IEMs that you might find really interesting, so make sure you've hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for the future IEM reviews coming up. In the meantime though, happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.